Hello everyone, good evening. Well, we have come to the last talk of the series. Well, in all the talks that we have had till now, what we see that most of the major works of Sri Aurobindo are all based on his own personal spiritual experiences and realizations. Be it Savitri, or the Life Divine, or the Synthesis of Yoga, they are all a transcription of the realizations of the divine consciousness and its expressions in the life of humanity. I'm sure that's what we realize, and that's what I've been emphasizing till now. And in fact, in 1913, that is to say, even before he started on the series of the Arya, Sri Aurobindo wrote in a letter, Sri Krishna has shown me the true meaning of the Vedas. He has also shown me the meaning of all in the Upanishads that is not understood either by Indians or Europeans. So even his books, The Secret of the Veda and his commentaries on the Upanishads, were all a direct revelation by Sri Krishna. Further, even his writings on India, her culture, her spiritual culture, and the secret of her Sanatana Dharma were revealed to Sri Aurobindo by Sri Krishna himself in the Alipur jail, about which Sri Aurobindo spoke in his Uttarpara speech. Sri Krishna had told Sri Aurobindo, something has been shown to you in this year of seclusion. That is when Sri Aurobindo was there in the Alipur jail. It is the truth of the Hindu religion. Remember that this is Sri Krishna himself speaking to Sri Aurobindo. It is this religion that I am raising up before the world. This is the Sanatana Dharma. This is the eternal religion which I have revealed to you. Please remember, Sri Krishna has revealed to Sri Aurobindo the Sanatana Dharma. So what happens is that this revelation by Sri Krishna of the Sanatana Dharma forms the source of the inspiration of Sri Aurobindo's writings on India. Well, this time, as I told you, I'll take up the book, The Renaissance in India. But this is not a single book in the usual sense. This volume consists of 4 different series of essays. The first one, The Renaissance in India, which was written in the Arya from August to November 1918. This series of essays were written in a way of appreciation of Mr. James H. Cousins' book of the same name. Second series is India Civilized. These 3 essays appeared in the Arya under the title Between December 1918 to February 1919. And they were written in response to a book by Sir John Woodroffe entitled Is India Civilized? Third series, Indian Culture and External Influence. This essay, published in March 1919, was written in answer to a comment in the Bengali journal Narayan on Sri Aurobindo's series, The Renaissance in India. The fourth series, A Defense of Indian Culture. These 24 chapters were in response to a severe criticism of Indian culture by William Archer. They were written between February 1919 and January 21. You see, this is a very unique volume where Sri Aurobindo has more or less responded to critics. You see, there have been the three major critics: James Cousins, John Woodruff, William Archer. This is why this volume makes very unusual. It is not a direct writing of a book per se. He has responded to each of these critics, and in the response, he has become done a creative analysis of Indian culture. So it's not one long thing like we did the other books, Life Divine, Synthesis, etc., where it started and ended a book. So this is a kind of a compilation of the different series. Then the question rose when he was responding to Is India Civilized series. Sri Aurobindo defines what is culture, how do we define it. And the very first sentence he says, a true happiness in this world is the right terrestrial aim of man. Very beautiful. He doesn't say you realize the Brahman or realize the soul, nothing of the sort. He says a true happiness is a right, is a justified thing in human beings. But unfortunately, we do not find this true happiness because he says finding it means to find a natural harmony of spirit, mind and body. So now we have a very beautiful clue as to why is it that we do not find happiness in our life? Because we do not have a harmony between soul, mind and body. And then he goes on to write, the culture of a people may be roughly described as the expression of a consciousness of life which formulates itself in three aspects. I've just given you very brief definitions, very marvelous definitions. First of all, there is a side of thought, of ideal, of upward will and the soul's aspiration. So what are the three demarcations or three factors of culture? First is the soul's aspiration, or the ideals, or the side of thought. Next, there is a side of creative self-expression and appreciative aesthesis, intelligence and imagination. So aesthesis, creative self-expression and intelligence and imagination. And the third, there is a side of the practical and outward formulation. If you look at it carefully, you will see the three things: the soul, the mind and the body. What he had defined, that if you want to find true harmony, you must have a true happiness, you must have a true harmony between soul, mind and body. So he extends the same definition to culture also. He says even a happy culture, a successful culture, must have these three levels: soul's aspiration, creative self-expression and a practical outward formulation. Now I'm taking you step by step. The first, the definitions of soul's aspiration. Where do you find exactly the soul's aspiration and this question of higher thinking? Sri Aurobindo says, it is a people's philosophy and higher thinking which give us the mind's purest, largest and most general formulation. So first I think the soul's aspiration is found in a culture's philosophy. So that is the most important thing, and its religion formulates the most intense form of its upward will and the soul's aspirations toward the fulfillment of the highest ideal and impulse. So friends, what we see about, we talk so much about our philosophy. That is the strength of Indian culture, because the soul's aspiration has been always very high, its philosophy very intense. But you would ask me, what exactly is this philosophy? Well, again from Sri Aurobindo, I'll give you two definitions. One on the theoretical side, the natural harmony of the soul's aspiration is expressed by three truths. Remember, this is soul's aspiration. Three truths are to be found. Number one, an affirmation of the supreme oneness, of the supreme one. That means in India, the Indian philosophy, Indian spirituality believes in the supreme one. Whatever names you may give to it, you call it Satchidananda or Brahman or reality, the names do not matter. That's why we call it the supreme one. So even in the poorest of the poor, the most ignorant, we all believe that there is one God under different names, different deities, different gods and goddesses. But everyone knows all these goddesses mean only one God. So that has been the central pillar of India's spiritual philosophy. Second, that there is a manifoldness of approach to the Supreme. This has been a marvelous thing in our Indian culture. That is why we don't call Hinduism a religion. It's a spirituality which has a manifoldness of approach to the Supreme Divine. We do not think that we should approach only in one way, only one manner. There are as many ways as there are people. So this is the tremendous flexibility that Indian spirituality has given to the world, that we are not chalked out any one path. So that has really given Indian culture the strength to survive the thousands of years. Had there been a rigidity, well, it would have disappeared long, many hundreds of years back. And the third pillar of the spiritual philosophy is the secret of the soul's sanctuary in man. That is to say, the Supreme is not just transcendental up in heaven, is there in each one of us, what we are called the Atman or the psychic being or the whatever the soul, etc. So this is the central philosophy of Indian spirituality. The Supreme One as within the human being, and then as many paths to approach and realize the Supreme. This is the theoretical side, the philosophic side. But on the practical level also they have given us 4 steps. First of all, the belief in the omnipresent reality, that's a must. That omnipresent reality is the Shakti or the God or Brahman or whatever, but there is one Supreme. So even on the practical level, we need to have that basis. Secondly, the individual's acceptance of the need for inner development and outside discipline. That means Indian spirituality in its practice must have this outer discipline and an inner urge to develop within. We are not to be happy only with the material life as it goes and we are just moving one to the other. We can move on, but there must be somewhere a kind of a search for a deeper truth, that there is something beyond, that this beyondness must be emphasized in each one's life. Third is the practice of the one prescribed religious or spiritual discipline. So this is again extremely beautiful about Indian spirituality, that there is a prescribed, we must be practicing very sincerely, honestly, faithfully, daily, any path that you have chosen. Be it this Shankara path or Ramanuja path or this person or that person, doesn't matter which path you have selected. But whatever the path, follow it, practice it, and follow the spiritual discipline. That's why there are umpteen and thousands of ashrams in India. Each guru has his own way. But what is important is to follow the path. This has been very fundamental to our Indian spiritual truths. And this has been the practice over thousands of years. But the last one is the conformity to the laws of individual and collective life. This is something pretty unique, that we have this, 4 dharmas, 4 ashramas, 4 living levels. 4 varnas as we call, we have to follow, what we said, brahmacharya and grihasthashrama and vanaprastha and sannyasa, whatever it is. So we believe in conformity to this kind of a collective life, because this is very important. Later on, if ever we see the question of Indian society, the secret of the longevity of Indian society, it is these varnas are the secrets, Sri Aurobindo would say. That is to say, what we have ultimately termed them as dharmas, the dharma of the brahmacharya, dharma of the vanaprastha, dharma of the grihasthashrama. So these are not just living styles, these are dharmas. So when it becomes a dharma, a spiritual law, then you see our life gets a meaning, gets a direction, and the whole society gets a structure. Well, later on, of course, the dharmas, etc., become very rigid. We'll see that later. But this has been the secret of India's great long existence for thousands of years. These dharmas that have started thousands of years back have been quite the strength of Indian society. So this is the spiritual pursuit, or what we say the aspirations, on the practical and on the theoretical level. Then we come to the next is what Sri Aurobindo said, the creative self-expression. That means the mind. First there was the soul, next is the mind. Now what is this expression of mind? It's not just philosophy, it's not just literature. It's art, poetry, literature provide for us the creative expression and impression of its intuition, imagination, vital turn and creative intelligence. So this entire gamut of poetry, literature, sculpture, temple, architecture, anything. And all these come into under whatever is intuitive or imagination. So this is again the strength of the Indian mind. I'll speak more about the Indian mind later, but I'm giving you just in bits and pieces now. Now the third part, which is the body, which is the practical and outward formulation, the power of the forms, types and rhythms it has given to life. That is the most important thing, what we call the practical forms, with the politics comes into the domain here. Any form that we are given, social structure, the varnas, the politics and all that. So this is the outer thing, what Sri Aurobindo explains further as its society and politics provide in their forms an outward frame in which the more external life works out what it can of its inspiring ideal and of its special character and nature under the difficulties of the environment. This is the most difficult thing. This is where either you succeed or fail in your culture. You may have great ideals, great art, great poetry, great temple architecture, but what is most important is the manifestation of these ideals in this society and in politics in the outward form. That means where there are hundreds and millions of people involved in the structure. So that is where, as I said earlier, India has brought about the social structures. And now you see why India has been very rigid almost in the social structures, which is now a kind of a detriment, I can understand. But since the beginning, it has been very strict about the social structure, because the outer form must hold the ideal. Otherwise, if the form is in jeopardy, the ideals cannot manifest. Well, these are the three forms: body, the soul, the body, and the mind. Now, to give further details. Now, what do we understand? Again, I go a little deeper about its spirituality. Because there is a marvelous sentence in Sri Aurobindo which says, spirituality is indeed the master key of the Indian mind. The sense of the infinite is native to it. Please remark the words. The sense of the infinite is native to it. It is not a stranger. It is not something beyond our understanding. And I can tell you from a simple experience when I was teaching in Bangkok, I was taking philosophy, Indian philosophy. This sense of the concept of the infinite was so strange to them. They could not grasp the idea of the infinite, the transcendent, the supreme. Whereas Sri Aurobindo says the sense of the infinite is native. It is in our in our blood, in our genes. So that is what is remarkable about Indian culture. The sense of the infinite is native. And I might give you further example. That when the mother came to India in 1914, she says somewhere that she chose India because the spirituality is so native to it, is so much there embedded in its matter, in the physical. So why she chose to come to India to fulfill her work? Because India was ready in the very physical with its spiritual touch. That's what Sri Aurobindo says here. The sense of the native, the infinite is native to it. Now what are the other characteristics? I'll just go through 2 or 3 important points. But these, some of us we may know, but we have never given it attention to these points. We have never been attentive to these points. One is that life cannot be rightly seen in the soul light, cannot be perfectly lived in the soul power of its externalities. That is to say, we have always believed that life as it is seen in the material outer life cannot be understood if we do not understand the beyond. You see, it is a very peculiar way of understanding things. That life cannot be rightly seen in the soul light, cannot be perfectly lived in the soul power of its externalities. She was alive to the greatness of material laws and forces. She had a keen eye for the importance of the physical sciences. She knew how to organize arts of ordinary life, but she saw that the physical does not get its full sense until it stands in right relation to the supra-physical. This is what I would like you to understand. The physical does not get its full sense until it stands in right relation to the supra-physical. This is the perfect balance. The physical can be understood only in the light of the supra-physical. There is a story that goes that one of the Hindu monks had met Socrates. I know, it was a long time back. But there is an interesting story that has been noted in some books here, especially by Paramahansa Yogananda. It says, the Hindu monk asked Socrates, it seems, what is the scope of your philosophy? Socrates said, an inquiry into the human phenomena. An inquiry into the human phenomena, that's what Socrates was doing. Then the monk, it seems, burst out laughing. He said, how can a man inquire into the human phenomena when he is ignorant of the divine ones? The same thing that Sri Aurobindo is telling us, that the finite can be understood only in the light of the infinite. So this juxtaposition of the finite and the infinite, the juxtaposition of the physical and the supraphysical, are absolutely important tenets of Indian philosophy. She saw that the complexity of the universe could not be explained in the present terms of man or seen in a superficial light, that there were other powers behind other powers within man himself. So if you want to understand Indian philosophy, we have always to see that there is the other worlds beyond, the other divinity beyond, the other power beyond, there is a Shakti, that always beyond and behind there is something else, which we do not know. But we have never seen physical reality per se, bereft of the divine behind. That is the most beautiful point we have here. And then she saw too that man has the power of exceeding himself, of becoming himself more entirely and profound than what he is. This is another important truth, that man can exceed himself. In what way? He's not becoming richer or more beautiful or more strong or more powerful or getting greater strength. No. He said that he could conquer the ranges of the mind. Beyond mind there are higher ranges. And the most important thing, that Indian spirituality believes that man can become a God, become one with God, become the ineffable Brahman. This is most unique. No other religion would ever tell humanity that man can become a God, can become one with God, become the ineffable Brahman. This was the fundamental belief in the minds of the rishis. That is why he says, Sri Aurobindo writes, with the logical practicality and sense of science and organized method which distinguished her mentality, she set forth immediately to find out the way. This is what is important. It is not just a belief that you can become a God. The next question is, how do you become a God? How do you become one with God? Then they said, no, I'll tell you the way. And the beautiful thing that Sri Aurobindo says, with a logical practicality and sense of science, this applies to yoga. So all the yogas that we have discussed before whatever the types of yogas, it's a scientific discovery. So they have found out this path, that how to become God and how to grapple with the infinite. So they have done a marvelous work, not only the theory, but the practical side. So these are some of the tenets of India's spiritual belief. So not only the theoretical that I have given you, the three truths, but how it differs with the spiritual ventures, spiritual ideas of other cultures. Now next, we come to the mind. The power of the ancient mind, Indian mind, was a strong intellectuality. You see, we all know that we have had a great culture of intellectuality. But what is the nature of this intellect, the mind? At once austere and rich, robust and minute, powerful and delicate. You see what Sri Aurobindo is giving us the opposites? Powerful and delicate, robust and minute. So we are not a one-sided mind. We have a kind of a massive in principle and curious in detail. You see, this is the kind of a two-sided mind, both sided. You know, when we say the mind has got two sides in the brain, so we have got a development of both the sides, where it says that its chief impulse was that of order and arrangement, but an order founded upon a seeking for the inner law of truth. I think we have read so many times about Indian mind, but no one has discovered these oppositions that have been balanced in the mind. The robust and minute, powerful and delicate, that of order, not only the external order, but an inner order. That is what the Indian mind is there. India has been preeminently the land of Dharma and Shastra. Now we see why India brought out the famous Shastras and the Dharma principle. The Shastras have given us an order and an arrangement founded upon an inner law. So why for centuries together, even today, most of the members of the community, we follow the Shastras, because that has been the stamp of order. Imagine with such diversity of culture, what would bind this culture? How do you give it a format? How do you give it not a rigidity, but a kind of a form? So these Shastras were there to guide the human living on day-to-day level. Please remember, it's not once in a while you must pray to God and forget about it. No. On a day-to-day level, from action to action, from event to event, how to do. And so Sri Aurobindo has great appreciation for the Shastras. He says, India has been preeminently the land of Dharma and Shastra. She searched for the inner truth and law of each human and cosmic activity. That found, she labored to cast into elaborate form and detailed law of arrangement its application in fact and rule of life. So today we moderners, we think, why do I follow the Shastra? Why should I follow? And I can tell you with a lot of confidence that because we have abandoned the Shastras, that our society has come into a chaos. Well, at a point of time you may say, well, it's modernity. But we have not found a new Shastra that is found, that is based upon the inner law of yoga and spirituality. So Indian culture was a genius to bring out the Dharma and Shastra, which united, which guided the common man on a day-to-day level, on a massive level. And then I would say that the period of curious elaboration of all life into science and an art assumes extraordinary proportions. And this is the sentence I wanted to read out to you, very important. There is no historical parallel for such an intellectual labor and activity before the invention of printing and the facilities of modern science. Yet all that mass of research and production and curiosity of detail was accomplished without these facilities and with no better record than the memory, and for an aid, the perishable palm leaf. So all the great sciences today, we have computers, we have laptops, we have all the things, but the only storage point for our ancient culture was memory and the perishable palm leaf. But you see what it has done. Nor was all this colossal literature confined to philosophy and theology, religion and yoga, logic and rhetoric, and grammar and linguistics, poetry and drama, medicine and astronomy, and the sciences. It embraced all life, politics and society, all the arts from painting to dancing, all the 64 accomplishments, everything then known that could be useful to life or interesting to the mind, even, for instance, to such practical side minutiae as the breeding and training of horses and elephants, each which had its own Shastra and its art, its apparatus and technical terms, its copious literature. I mean, you can't even understand when we enumerate these activities. But what is beautiful, what we get the essence of it is, that is, Sri Aurobindo says, even to the last question of breeding and training the horses and the elephants, there was an absolute Shastra for that. It's not just a temple architecture, how do you build a temple, how do you do a sculpture. I mean, what more practical society can you imagine? I mean, we have gone to the animal breeding, we have gone to the sculptures, training, literature, painting, politics, poetry. It's not just a question of, saying how, what we have in the modern times, literary criticism. We did not have a literary criticism. It was a Shastra. There were some great authors, writers, poets have given us the essence of the Shastras. How do you do this poetry? I think we have had great many, we are not very good in literature, literary criticism, but everything has been codified. So you can see it has taken us hundreds of years. But this is what has given the uniqueness is Shastras, their Dharma, and their interpretation of each human activity. Make it simple marriages. A simple thing of a woman carrying a baby when she conceives. Even those little details, why she should conceive, what time she should conceive, everything has been put in form. That is the beauty of this culture. So you can take anything and everything, and today we are taking time to discover all this in temples or in libraries or in cultures, but this is what we are only doing to discover. Now the third thing, the body, the life element. Now this is marvelous. Sri Aurobindo, I think in one of my previous talks also I referred to this, that spirituality does not flourish on earth in the void, even as our mountain tops do not rise like those of an enchantment of a dream out of the clouds without a base. This is the most central point to Indian culture, that we have great spiritual heights, but the Mount Everest is not standing in the clouds. It has a huge, massive Himalayan range. So if our Indian philosophy had these great heights of Brahman and Satchidananda, and how to become one with God, such high philosophy could not have existed, persisted, continued without a massive base of life. This is where Sri Aurobindo is telling us that the Westerners do not understand. They have missed this point, that we do not have only a high-fi philosophy of Brahman and Satchidananda saying, in fact, to the extent they said, oh, Indians are only philosophers, they are not practicals. They are not practical people. I mean, all these questions of these cousins and everybody, they criticize India saying, Indians are only philosophers, not practical. Sri Aurobindo has given a marvelous example to say, can the Mount Everest stay alone, be there above the clouds without having the base? So this is exactly the thing that happened in India, that we have had a large base, and Sri Aurobindo writes, when we look at the past of India, what strikes us is a stupendous vitality, her inexhaustible power of life and joy of life, her almost unimaginably prolific creativeness. That's why I think people cannot understand India, because it is unimaginably prolific creativeness. Every corner, be it from the smallest design in the clothes, in the fabric, in the temple, in the architecture, in anything. So there is such a variety, such a stupendous creative genius, as Sri Aurobindo calls stupendous vitality, her inexhaustible power of life and joy of life. It's not an ascetic life. We enjoy our festivals, we enjoy our food, we enjoy our dress. This is a colorful thing. So this richness, this color and this joy, joie de vivre as we say, I mean, it's there in every aspect. So this is something that goes beyond the comprehension of the Western mind. That's why Sri Aurobindo says, there have been so many critics in his own time. Nowadays that criticism has become less maybe. But in his time you have seen so many great authors have come up with great criticism. So Sri Aurobindo is saying, it's not for you to understand, it's beyond your reach. So he says, for 3,000 years, remember this word, for 3,000 years at least, it is indeed much longer, she has been creating abundantly and incessantly, lavishly, with an inexhaustible many-sidedness, republics and kingdoms. I'm just giving a long list if you can remember that. Republics and kingdoms and empires. I mean, this is the joie de vivre as saying. Philosophies and cosmogonies, and sciences, and creeds, and arts, and poems, and all kinds of monuments, palaces, and temples, and public works, communities, and scientists, and societies, and religious orders, laws, and codes, and rituals, physical sciences, psychic sciences, systems of yoga, systems of politics and administration, arts spiritual, arts worldly, trades, industries, fine arts. The list is endless. And in each item, there is almost a plethora of activity. I think there should be a wonderful research just based on this single sentence. How rich, how wonderful has been our stupendous energy. Well, we have lived thousands of years not in vacuum, but it has been a dynamic creation, I would say dynamic expression of its high ideals. You see, this base cannot be this vast, this multiple, this multifaceted, if the ideal was not that high and that flexible. If there is a single path, then this would have been, the base would not have been that big. So the India's genius of culture is only an expression of its high philosophy. The philosophy or spirituality which does not have this great heights, does not give room for this expression. So here we see a whole inexhaustible, he says the list is endless. She creates and is not satisfied and is not tired. She will not have an end of it. Seems hardly to need the space for rest, a time for inertia and lying fallow. She expands too outside her borders. Her ships cross the ocean and the fine superfluity of her wealth brims over to Judea, Egypt and Rome. Her colonies spread her arts and epics and creeds to the archipelago. Her traces are found in the sands of Mesopotamia. Her religions conquered China and Japan and spread westward as far as Palestine and Alexandria, and figures of the and this is beautiful. And the figures of the Upanishads and the sayings of the Buddhists are re-echoed in the lips of Christ. Remember, friends, the figures of the Upanishads and the sayings of the Buddhists are re-echoed on the lips of Christ. Everywhere, as on our soil, so in our works, there's a teeming of the superabundant energy of life. So it's not that we have a huge population, but the huge population has a superabundant energy, expressing her philosophy, knowing the philosophy or not, but the genius of this abundant vitality, mind, is superb. And then Westerners have criticized in one of those books, he says, that European critics complain that in her ancient architecture, and I'm sure some of you must have seen Indian temples and architectures, sculpture and art, there's no reticence, no holding back of riches, no blank spaces, that she labors to fill every rift with ore, occupy every inch with plenty. I'm sure after reading this, go on to see your temples. There's not an inch in the temples which is space, which is empty, which is vacant, which has nothing there. So this richness, you as I say in the modern word, mind-boggling. We don't understand. So the Westerners have said, these Indians don't have this concept of space, empty space. They're filled in everything. Said that she labors to fill every rift with ore, occupy every inch with plenty. Aurobindo has given a wonderful answer to this criticism. He says, well, but defect or no, that is a necessity of a superabundance of life, of the teeming of the infinite within her. She lavishes her riches because she must. As the infinite fills every inch of space with a stirring of life and energy because it is the infinite. Marvelous. So why is this world so full of beauty and riches and ananda and delight and form and color? Because the infinite is full of them. Infinite did not say, I don't know what to do with this empty space on the northern star or on the moon. So the infinite, where there is the infinite consciousness, there is infinite energy, remember, it's a chit tapas. So because of this tapas, there is this expression. And through this expression, there is the delight aspect. So we see in a temple or in a pujas or in a festivals or in a dresses or in a saris, you don't have a plain little clothes, without any color. There are forms and designs and embroidery, all the riches. So what Aurobindo says is, she lavishes her riches because she must. As the infinite fills every inch of space with the stirring of life and energy, because it is the infinite. A marvelous way to understand Indian culture. Otherwise, we will not be able to appreciate. Sometimes we do not even perceive there's so much of wealth and riches and beauty and around that we miss it because it's too much. We cannot even grasp it. Sometimes we keep on taking photographs and mobile photographs, but it's just a photograph because our mind cannot capture, our eyes cannot take it. But then the marvelous thing is, it lavishes her riches because she must. And why is it that she must? Because her consciousness is so infinite, so wide, so flexible. And that is why he says, India is so rich, so such a great variety. And because of this broad base, the peaks of our spirituality have been maintained for thousands of years. So there has been a vice versa. The peaks, they are giving the inspiration, they are feeding the life, and life feeding back the spirituality. So it's been a marvelous culture. Friends, do not judge our country by what is happening today. It has gone through this 3,000 or 4,000 years of this superabundant energy, creativity on life level, creativity on mental level, creativity on spirituality. So he says, there has come about, or Sri Aurobindo used the word, superannuation, a kind of an exhaustion. A culture that has survived all this politics and everything that we have seen, a huge list, for 4,000 to 5,000 years. There is some kind of an exhaustion that took place. So in the beginning there's a beautiful spiritual outflowering, in which the forms were supple, flexible and freely responsive to its essential spirit. That fluid movement passed away into an age of strong intellectuality, in which all was fixed into distinct, sufficiently complex, but largely treated and still supple forms and rhythms. Now there came, as a consequence, a period of richly crystallized fixity. As I told you in one of my previous talks also, you cannot be creative forever. So there is a huge period. But then we languish into a kind of a fixity, and we say, day-to-day routine must be like this. Me with my age coming upon me, I can experience that. We want a daily routine, normal, without change, without much ado, saying, follow your routine. This is exactly what happened to our culture after 5,000 years. It got into a richly crystallized fixity, shaken by crises which were partly met by a change of ideas and modification of forms. But the hard binding of set forms triumphed at last, and there was a decline of the inspiring spirit, a stagnation of living force, a progressive decay of the outward structure. So this phase set in toward this end of this 18th, 19th century. There was a kind of a decadence of the spirit. Surely Sri Aurobindo says, because of exhaustion, superannuity. And he would say, it is at this time that we had the impact of other cultures. So remember last time when we were talking about India's spirit going through different phases, conservation became a practice, and this is the time when things became crystallized, fossilized, fixation came in, and there at that point where the inspiration became dead, the foreign invasions began. So it's been a beautiful history. There's a reason why the ancient Europeans or the Mohammedans, they did not come earlier. They could not, because of this richness of the culture, and the mind was so great. But when this inspiration and this energy, they go down, the foreign impact comes. It was at this moment that the European wave swept over India. The first effect of this entry of a new and quite opposite civilization was the destruction of much that had no longer the power to live, the deliquescence of much else, a tendency of the devitalization of the rest. So the first impact with the Mohammedans and especially the Europeans was that there was a kind of a destruction of much that had to be destroyed. We have this, when the death of forms comes in, we become so attached to our own forms, we cannot clear them. As we in India, we have lots of things, we keep on keeping them for decades together. We say, no, this will be useful, that will be useful. We keep all the junk at home, we don't want to clear it. This is exactly what happened in India. We had so many centuries of things that were dying in their form, but we did not want to get rid of these forms, be it on the social level or material level or intellectual level. And that is the first impact of the Western culture. So Sri Aurobindo says that the doors were opened to the West by this providence, because India had to be cleaned up. It had to get rid of this old dying material. So that was very important, and it was a crucial moment and an ordeal of perilous severity. A less vigorous energy of life might well have foundered and perished under the double weight of the deadening of its old innate motives and a servile imitation of alien ideas and habits. Well, India, although it has been destroyed, by the Mughals, by the Muslims, by the invaders, by the Europeans, I don't have to tell you the story of the destruction that took place in India. He says, India, because it has had this innate reserves of energy, because it had this innate strength of its spirituality, that it survived this onslaught. He says, any other nation would have been, as he says, would have been demolished, would have died. In fact, there are plenty of examples where because of the colonization, lot of these cultures died, countries changed their culture, but India survived because its soul had withdrawn, its vitality had withdrawn, but it is not dead. It was, as we said, a kind of a layer of deadness came in because of these old things. So that is what the foreign invasions did. They cleaned up the dead things in our culture. And then, what was the impact? Sri Aurobindo says there are three things that happened. The dormant intellectual and critical impulse was revived. You see, what happens is, when you get a foreigner, an alien culture that's impacting, then because of this clash of the cultures, then the old culture starts reviving. Otherwise, when somebody is not forcing you from outside, then we start rotting from within. So, time and again we have said, the British culture was not, the British people invasion was not just a Britain coming and conquering, because there was a nature which wanted us to be cleansed, because we did not have the strength for ourselves to do so. And then secondly, it rehabilitated life and awakened the desire of new creation, and then reviving Indian spirit face to face with novel conditions and ideals. So this is what happened. It revived the old culture, dormant intellect, new forms of life came in, new challenges come in, and that was the beginning of India's, rebirth, or what we say, the Renaissance. You see, we are drawing the whole history of 3,000 to 4,000 years, how it ended up in a kind of fixation, dormant culture, and then that had to be awakened. And then that is the beginning of Renaissance. The recovery of old spiritual knowledge and experience. So Sri Aurobindo gives us a hint as to what should India do now in this Renaissance. We talk about the rebirth of the country, Renaissance of the country. He says, what are you supposed to do? Is it that you bring in new forms, new management theories, new things of how to make your industries greater? No. The first thing that needs to be done is recovery of the old spiritual knowledge and experience in all its splendor, depth and fullness is the first and the most essential one. So get back our spiritual knowledge. Dig back into the Vedas, into the Gita, into the Upanishads, into our Shastras, into Dharmas, into our Puranas. Because we have become too modern. We think all those things are not necessary in our life. But if we forget our own spiritual culture, we will stand nowhere in front of the invasion of the Western culture, Western modes, Western thinking, Western formats. So Sri Aurobindo calls it the most essential work to be done is to recover the old spiritual knowledge and experience. Secondly, the flowing of the spirituality into new forms of philosophy, literature, art, science, and critical knowledge. The Sri Aurobindo doesn't say recover the old spiritual knowledge, but it says what is again as important is the old knowledge must get new form. Because the forms are important. We should not prolong the old forms into the new age. New forms, new dances, new architecture, new painting styles, new living styles, new philosophies, new management theories, how to manage your matter, and everything must find a new form. And that is what is happening at present in India, I think, that it has been revivified, and somewhere there is a hectic activity, be it the influence of the West, be it because of this corona that's happening, be it the computer that has come in, be it the digitalization. But you can see in India this kind of a thing taking place, that new forms are taking place. And lots of young these scientists and scholars of Sanskrit are trying to get back into this old, the Vedas and the Upanishads, and getting it back through Sanskrit. So that's why there's a kind of a revival of Sanskrit itself. And that revival of Sanskrit is of great importance, because getting back Sanskrit is a sure way to getting back our old experience, spiritual experience. These are two interrelated. It's not the question of only spiritual knowledge, but Sanskrit is the gateway to spiritual knowledge and experience. So that is why the Mother had given such a great importance to the revival of Sanskrit. And then the new forms. And the third one, an original dealing with modern problems in the light of Indian spirit and the endeavor to formulate a greatest synthesis of a spiritualized society is the third and the most difficult. Well, the third and the most difficult is to have modern problems resolved in the light of our own spirit, in the light of our own philosophy, in the light of our own culture. This means we should not be imitating. We should not be thinking that the West has the solutions for all our problems. On the contrary, Mother says somewhere that India is the repository of all the problems of the world. And these problems have been given to India so that India solves them, and then only the world receives her solutions and gets further, gets into the future. And somewhere in Vande Mataram he writes very beautifully, the character of the East, of Asia, is synthesis. The character of Europe is in details. He says Europe is wonderful. Of course, in those times there was only Europe, but there's also America now. Their character is in details. You call it scientific details, you call it social details, you call it anything. But we, Asiatic countries, especially India, their role is to have synthesis. So remember these two words, in detail and in synthesis, are the two characters of West and East. So today he says the West will go on into its detail, but it will come to a point where it will have a complete confusion. Because there will be so many details, so much of details, be it science or life or society or individual life, that they will have no direction. That is why they will have to turn to India. Because India, its soul is that of synthesis. So from the ancient times, it has synthesized all cultures, all religions, all philosophies. It has given complete go to all kinds of different thinking. But the most beautiful thing was this aspect of synthesis. So if India has to offer anything to the world, it is this cauldron of synthesis in which everything of the world is put inside. We are not here to break up religions, break up societies, break up nations, no. Our nature, our destiny, our mission is to synthesize. And it is in the synthesis that there is harmony, that there is human unity, there is this inner being, because the synthesis stands on a synthesis with our own inner being. So this is the mission, the uniqueness of the country is synthesis. So Sri Aurobindo says that we have to formulate a synthesis of a spiritualized society which can solve the modern problems. The last quotation is this one. I read it long many years back, but I thought I must share it with you. God always keeps for himself a chosen country, in which the higher knowledge is through all chances and dangers, by the few or the many, continually preserved. Higher knowledge is through all chances and dangers continually preserved, and for the present, in this Chaturyuga, at least that country is India. Whenever he chooses to, remember, please listen very closely. Whenever he, God, chooses to take the full pleasure of ignorance, of the dualities, of strife and wrath and tears and weakness and selfishness, the tamasic and rajasic pleasures of the play of the Kali in short, he dims the knowledge in India and puts her down into weakness and degradation, so that she may retire into herself and not interfere with this movement of his Leela. Wonderful. I don't know if you caught it. Whenever God chooses to be in ignorance, he doesn't choose to be in ignorance, but what it means, he wants to enjoy these dualities. He wants to enjoy the tamas. He wants to enjoy the rajasic pleasures. He wants to enjoy the strife and wrath and all that of wars and all the stupidity that humanity is doing. He says, India, withdraw your knowledge. Because if India's knowledge is there, if India's sunlight is there, world cannot be in this nonsense and ignorance. So he says, India, he dims the knowledge in India and puts her down into weakness and degradation, so that she may retire and not interfere with this movement of his Leela. When he wants to rise up from the mud and Narayana in man to become once again mighty and wise and blissful, then he once more pours out the knowledge on India and raises her up, so that she may give the knowledge with its necessary consequences of might, wisdom and bliss to the whole world. When there is contracted movement of knowledge, the yogins in India withdraw from the world and practice yoga for their own liberation and delight, or for the liberation of a few disciples. But when the movement of knowledge again expands, and the soul of India expands with it, they come forth once more and work in the world and for the world. Yogins like Janaka, Ajatasastru and Kartavirya once more sit on the thrones of the world and govern the nations. So friends, do not be surprised on what is happening. It is God who is doing these destinies of the country. So if knowledge is brought back, the sunlight is brought back into India, then the old kings like Janaka will come back. And I think this gives us a great strength and solace. That's why I told you many times that reading Sri Aurobindo gives us strength of understanding, of peace. So we see here that now the country, the India is awakening. God seems to have brought back knowledge. And now I've just finished to tell you that what we realize from this series of talks on the introduction of Sri Aurobindo's major works is that his major works are an extension of his own consciousness. To read them is one of the best ways to contact him directly. It's true we cannot reach the sun, but his sunlight is sufficient to remove the darkness of our ignorance and to enlighten us with Vidya that brings us peace and the delight of existence. This has been the main trend through all these 8 talks, that all the works are the reflections of his direct consciousness. So read him, and that's why the mother told us, read Savitri, even if you do not understand, because that's the best way to connect, to contact. So even if you do not understand, read the Life Divine, read the Synthesis, read Savitri, because this is like touching the feet of God. It's for me, I do not know for you. My feeling I'm telling you. And we cannot reach this magnificent sunlight, the supramental sun. But the radiance that He is giving us upon earth is sufficient to cleanse the earth. And be wonderful for all of us, each one of us, to give us the peace and the joy, the delight of existence. That has been my personal experience, and because of which I wanted to share with you Sri Aurobindo's major works. And as somebody said rightly, this is not the end of sharing. We'll share many more moments. Because for me, sharing is sharing my delight of reading Sri Aurobindo. It's not sharing knowledge. I have no knowledge, nothing. It's just that I have delight in reading Sri Aurobindo. And my delight and my devotion to Sri Aurobindo, I share with all of you. Thank you so much for being with me for these 8 long weeks. I hope it's been a wonderful session. At least I enjoyed it. And I'm sure some of you have enjoyed too. Thank you so much.